Thank you for watching IntoWineTV. Today we are filming in Sonoma, and we're talking about wine alcohol levels. And Bartholomew, I know this is something that's very near and dear to your heart. You've talked about it a lot. What are your thoughts on the increasing alcohol levels?
How long have we got? Because this is a big topic. I actually just wrote something for Jancis Robinson on her Purple Pages website about this, and it has become already the fourth most commented topic and the fourth most viewed topic in the history of the Jancis Robinson site. It's actually someone else who started a thread based on what I wrote about the alcohol levels. And there are a lot of very controversial opinions on alcohol levels. The problem is that, just to set the scene, a wine like Mondavi Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, which was a spectacular wine in the 70s and 80s, and really those wines from Napa Valley in the 70s and 80s created the reputation for Napa Valley making great wines. And I'm not saying a high alcohol wine isn't a great wine, but it's not an internationally appreciated style. And today, Mondavi Reserve may be 15.5 or more in alcohol. So it's changed a lot. And the argument that people make is that it can still be balanced, and as long as it's balanced, it's good. And I agree with that, but the point that people are missing is the health aspect. Someone like me who drinks probably a bottle of wine a day, 2 glasses at lunch, 3 at dinner, pretty normal for a lot of wine drinkers. If you're drinking 12.5%, that's nothing wrong with it, it's pretty healthy. If you're drinking 15.5%, it's pretty unhealthy, because the difference between a bottle of 12.5% alcohol and a 15.1% alcohol is about 3 vodka tonics, and doesn't make sense to drink 3 vodka tonics after you've drunk a bottle of wine.
Well, it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. See, when I travel overseas, I am seeing a lot of international wines. Actually, those levels are increasing too. So I think it's not just a U.S. problem, and I see it personally as a problem. I interview a lot of winemakers, and that's one of the questions I ask. And generally, what I'm getting is people saying, well, we think they're a little too high, but if they're balanced, they're okay. And yet, the levels seem to be creeping up. Even, I was just in Europe last year, as I know Richard was, that the levels are going up and up and up all over the place.
So we're experiencing global warming all over the place. I mean, that's only one of several factors, I think, that's contributed to it. I love the California Cabernets of the 70s, and I'm really sad that that style has changed. I can't find those wines anymore, except from a couple of producers that hang on to the older style. Another big problem is that we replanted in California when phylloxera was discovered again with a lot of clones.
What was that? When what was discovered?
Phylloxera, the louse that basically destroyed the wine industry back in the 1870s, 1880s. The louse was brought over unknowingly on plants from America to Europe. In America, it had little effect on wine growing here because the American rootstock had developed tolerance to it. But in Europe, there was no tolerance, so it basically destroyed in a matter of a few years the great vineyards of Europe, and they sought for a long time for cures for it, and the only cure was really to take American rootstock that had developed that tolerance and plant that in Europe and graft the fine varieties from France and other European countries back onto that rootstock.
And do those tend to have higher alcohol levels, or
so
why is that?
No. What happened in California is that there was a lot of replanting that happened in the 80s and 90s. Davis had recommended a rootstock that turned out not to be phylloxera resistant, and they started replanting with a lot of clones that are bigger bodied, get more alcoholic, get more ripe. So on top of the weather conditions, not only in California, but pretty much around the world that have been heating up, and the fact that there are critics that have placed higher points on very high alcohol wines in recent years, so there's been a stronger trend for that. Then we also have clones that are capable of ripening to that level, to getting to those higher sugar levels.
But I think if I could
and yeast that they've developed too, to be able to ferment to dry those grapes that get to such high alcohol levels. I think there is retrenchment going on. I think people like Bartholomew and Jancis Robinson and others have, sounded the call. And I think a lot of us drinkers are pretty fed up with wines that really don't go with our food very well because they're so high in alcohol. They're fatiguing to drink. So we are starting to see some of the leading California winemakers picking earlier, trying to cut back on the high alcohol levels.
I was going to say, the other thing, in addition to being a wine writer, I also write about food. And I think the American palate is so vastly different than a European palate. So I think our wines really reflect that, because Americans tend to like things that are sweeter or perceived to be sweeter. And so it's easier for, I think, Americans to gravitate towards these really kind of plush, high alcohol wines, because there is a perception of more fruit and sweetness to it. So European palates are not geared towards as much of a sweetness factor as I think Americans are, and I think that's part of it.
I do agree with you that it's not just a California problem, because I just used that wine as an example,
right,
because it's one which really sticks out to me. But it's a problem in Australia, and there's a
huge problem in Bordeaux.
Huge problem in Bordeaux. It's nothing to do with global warming, I don't think, because it's more to do with what you were saying, the yeast clones which are using now. It used to be that you couldn't ferment a wine above 16% alcohol. Now a wine can ferment above 16% depending on the yeast and various other factors. It is changing. There's a huge wine supermarket in England called Tesco's, and they have basically told the Australians that they're not buying any wines that are over a certain percent alcohol. And with not just the Jancis Robinsons of the world, as you mentioned, my father is very vocal as well, Michael Broadbent. There is a curve that's crescendoed. Basically, it's following the same curve of Riesling growth in America. When you think that 16 years ago you couldn't give Riesling away, then the sort of wine writers in England started talking about it, wine writers in America, the sommeliers in America and elsewhere, and then the wine retailers and so on, they started talking about it. Now, it took about 7 years, but today the supply of Riesling isn't high enough for a demand. And I'm seeing that same curve about the alcohol levels. They grew dramatically in the course of past 10, 12 years for various factors, various reasons, but the shouting about it has started about 3 or 4 years ago. I think in about another 7, 8 years, the demand for lower alcohol wines will be so strong. The consumers are already getting it and demanding it.
I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I talk to consumers, I talk to winemakers, and there is an overall agreement that people want wines that are pulled back a little bit on that alcohol scale. Yet, the overreaching wines that are coming out are still high in alcohol, and no one's really making the effort to pull that back on a consistent basis.